Hey Carson, I have an idea for rhythm changes.
Okay, hit me.
So I think I'm going to publish a summer show list of things at the Jazz Fest and other festivals. But I'm going to use AI and I'm going to make a list of only shows that don't exist.
Perfect idea. I don't see anything that could go wrong with that.
There's nobody else who can call me on it and shut me down either. If that's what I want to do, then that's what I'm going to do.
Absolutely. And you won't have to make a big, long apology post about it. For anyone who's not aware, that the Chicago Times, I believe, was at fault for that? Or
yeah, supposedly it was an insert that they commissioned. You know, it was a third party who produced this. But yeah, it got inserted into this paper. Yeah.
It was all movies that don't exist. Is that what it was? Oh, books. It was a summer reading list that contained many books that don't exist by like really big authors. So that, you know, even the writer, if he was using AI, should have been like, oh, wouldn't I have known if the author of The Martian was writing a new book?
Yeah, that's the thing, is it wasn't fake people, right? Because you could be forgiven for not knowing like an individual title, and so it's slightly hard to fact check. But it's even funnier once it ends up going around. We found that out from 404 Media, which we're both big fans of. But yeah, and then it ended up getting circulated a lot more after that.
Yeah, I believe that insert kind of made it into like many cities' major publications. Sort of like the summer list of, so many people are looking for books that don't exist, and the author of it kind of published this like kind of sweaty apology where he was like, I just kind of missed that these don't exist. Like I was using AI and I should have checked.
Yeah, I was just following instructions.
It seems like maybe the one thing you'd want to check if you were about to use AI to generate a whole article for your work, you would maybe just check that the core facts were the case, if for nothing else.
My gosh. Yeah, no, that was one of the more amusing things we threw around. We took a break. I come back and I've got an actual webcam. I don't know who that guy was who you were podcasting with, who refused to even take the time to go use something other than the built-in webcam on his ThinkPad. But it's a good thing you let go of that guy.
Yeah. He was like, oh, I never got a chance to figure out what he actually looked like. So, I never know if I'll see him in the wild.
Yeah, lower resolution than like the latest AI generated videos for sure. But yeah, we're back. It's basically summer already, so that's an interesting feeling. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's warm in my laneway apartment, but I'm enjoying the hot weather. Just got back from some good time in Calgary, seeing some friends, and feeling good, feeling the summer vibes.
Yeah, so what are we talking about today, my friend?
I think we're going to dive into a few different kind of cases of maybe what we'll broadly categorize as like streaming fraud. These are cases in Spotify where there's not fake artists that we've talked about, like the perfect fit content that Liz probably talks about in Mood Machine, but these other cases where, you know, these platforms who have quite lax moderation and security can kind of act as vectors for bad actors, or in one case, totally benign actors, just bad platforms.
Yeah, so the big story that centers our discussion is something that you showed me, and it came from Wired magazine, and it's a longer read, and it's got a bunch of reporting. It's about a story that hasn't concluded, basically. So there's a lot of people who didn't talk in the story, and there isn't a known ending, but it's by Kate Knibbs for The Wired, and the title of the article is "A Billion Streams and No Fans Inside a $10 million AI Music Fraud Case." I think that's interesting because I don't think this is an AI music fraud case. I think AI generated music is a correlated but not actually crucial piece of the puzzle here, because what this story is about, and we can talk about that right now, it could be done with real quote unquote music that you or I would make.
Yep.
It doesn't matter whether the music is made by AI. Well, I mean, I suppose it does, because the easier and easier it is to do that, the easier it is for stuff like this to happen.
Yes.
But it doesn't preclude it from happening if you couldn't do AI music. You could still absolutely do this with real music. And in fact, in this story, they did, because you can still go and listen to the real music. I have the Bandcamp link to this project that I'll drop in the description. It's still, you can still go hear what this music was, but it was made, the origin of this story is at a real music project that two people made.
Yes. Yeah, and I think in this kind of wild case, which we can maybe get into some of the specifics of, AI, it's being framed as an AI case probably because AI is kind of buzzy right now. But like you said, it's could have been done much earlier, but I think bad actors are going to continue to both generate the music of it from AI and to generate the plays, like use AI to create the tools they need to, farm streams, which Spotify has some ways of detecting, but in this story, that like all detection efforts failed until after the fact.
So can you outline basically what happened in this story? I could jump in too, but because you sent it to me, I'm curious how you would blast through it.
I will do my best. I don't have the article pulled up in front of me here. I'm just signing back into my my Wired account, but it kind of covers this friendship between these two folks, one of whom is a doctor or medical professional of some sort, or runs a bunch of medical clinics, and his collaborator, who's maybe a more traditional like music producer promoter kind of guy, and they team up. And the story kind of, I would say, frames the music producer almost as like a victim in this scam story. This is like kind of a case of like your typical con man, this medical professional. You got their names handy?
Yeah. So the scammer is Mike Smith,
right,
and the guy who spoke for the story, because Mike Smith is charged with a crime, spoiler alert, he's not speaking to this journalist at Wired. So the story is told through talking to the other guy, and his name is Jonathan Hay. And so their project together is just called Smith and Hay.
Right. And so it's kind of a classic like con man story where Smith is, I think, quite charismatic and is the money man of this, and is working with Hay as like a collaborator. And, Hay, I'm not sure how convincingly, basically makes it sound like had no idea that Smith was really on the sides as they were working on music together, engaging in small degrees of what he thought was small degrees of streaming fraud, and then turned to be like really big degrees of streaming fraud. I think at one time Smith just said, "Oh, I've like told the people at my medical clinics to listen to the music or something," which like wouldn't really account. Like it was charting. This is like really, really high numbers, right? This one album was like doing crazy numbers, and then it all just dropped off when they stopped perpetuating or getting these botted listens.
It got him a Billboard chart position, in, I don't know which Billboard chart it was, I can't remember, but like a number one on some Billboard chart because there was so much action on it.
Right, which is again really crazy that it kind of got this big and this far. But this whole thing wasn't discovered by Spotify. I think many of these platforms purport to have tools that are supposed to catch this type of behavior, this type of fraud. It wasn't caught until Hay blew the whistle on Smith and kind of put everything together that something wasn't quite right, that this guy was not on the up and up, and there was stuff going on here that was breaking the law, not just bending. I was going to say bending, but this is definitely a crime that Smith did here.
Yeah, breaking Spotify's terms service for sure. There's two quick things on that. One of them is it's interesting that Hay seems to have had his complaint fall on deaf ears at first, where he tried to tell his colleagues that something was going wrong here, and then they were like, no, actually this guy seems pretty cool, and they kind of ignored him until he went to them a couple times, or until it started to mount. And then the other thing is that ultimately Spotify say that they stopped him eventually, and that they limited the damage to a small percentage of what could have been paid in total, which is possible because the payments accrue, you get paid based on like 1 to 2 months ago
Yep.
out of your distributor. So there's some time there to correct things like this if it happens. So even if you get a lot of traffic and streams, there is still technically time for Spotify to clamp down if they see something like that happen. So maybe that's how they can claim that they say that, even though they would have got the chart action at first. Maybe once they realize going on, that doesn't necessarily mean that they had to pay out on all the fraudulent streams. And there isn't really any way that you can observe how well that's being done day to day. But at least in this story too, Spotify do claim that they stopped most of it from being paid.
Yes, I would believe that. And I would wonder, I mean, there's a couple like reasons why this story I think matters and maybe matter to our audience. The first is that like I think things like this are going to continue happening, although probably at a smaller scale if a criminal wants to like stay under the radar, right? I think maybe they just flew a little too close to the sun, charting on Billboard, and getting these quite large payouts. One reason it matters, like we've talked about the pro rata system, is these fake plays eat into your share of, if you're just an independent artist, your share of what you're being paid out on a given platform. So people using, bots or fake plays or kind of directing traffic to their stream illegitimately really matters because it affects everyone's bottom line. Again, I think the numbers would have to be quite huge to really affect an individual like, say, you or I. And in theory, if it was that big, then it would be caught again. But it wasn't caught. It wasn't caught by any kind of automatic means.
In fact, it's funny that what you actually hear when you're in the indie artist bubble more often is you hear people complaining about the false positives. You hear people complaining about, I was flagged for fraudulent streaming, but I didn't do anything because maybe I was associating with a playlist where there was some of that happening, or it's just a full-on false positive. So I think you and we've probably heard about more false positives than about more fraud. That doesn't mean that there's more false positives and fraud out there. It just means that we end up hearing about it. I think it's quite possible that the absolute percentage of number of streams that are fraudulent is quite high. Like this article even discusses that too. They say, it could be, 3%, 10% or more. That's possible.
Yeah.
But you hear a lot about the false positives too.
Yeah, it's a really interesting problem because I don't know how much Spotify is really incentivized to do anything about it. Right?
Not at all.
The fact that their tools fail to detect this, they have kind of a an optical reason, like a PR reason to say that they like moderate this stuff and care about it. Like they don't want their platform to go to complete crap by like having stuff on playlists that's garbage and paying out to fake artists and stuff. They obviously don't want that, but they aren't really like their bottom line actually is not impacted by this as long as those, the real users are paying their subscriptions. They don't care what happens on the platform.
Yeah. I like to think that if I was Hey, that I wouldn't sign on with Smith or even agree to meet up with him. The telling of their meeting is kind of weird too, that I would have seen some sketch in there, but I don't know how much I can rely on that, right? Like obviously people like that, they throw money at you and it's hard, but if I think about it, I like to think that I wouldn't get very far with such a person, but who knows?
Yeah, it's tough to say. And like, that's where I think I'm a little bit skeptical of Hayes' position that like he didn't know anything was amiss until like the very end where they're charting and he's like, this can't be right. I think he probably had some sense that there's something not quite right, but if he was, I think he's involved in some other maybe less legitimate industries the article kind of alludes to, aside from just being not less legitimate. I think he's like a club promoter. He just works in entertainment, and entertainment can be a bit of a sketchy business at times. And so someone's offering you a lot of money, maybe you don't ask a lot of questions. I don't think that excuses Hay, but I think that probably explains why he would take a large sum of money from someone who's probably pretty obviously a con man.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first things that could be done to de-incentivize Spotify from facilitating this is if they forced all users to use two-factor authentication. Because, I mean, on one hand, Spotify and Netflix have never had an incentive to do that because they want people to share accounts, basically, until they try and convert them, right, into individual payers instead of pooling the subscription. But they want more activity. They want more use. They want more streams or watch time or whatever they are. So they don't have any incentive to make it harder for users to stay logged in or be logged in. But the key component of like bot stream farming is having a bajillion phones and working them all, right? So I mean, if you do harder login controls, you can throw a wrench in that to some extent, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of one way of doing it. I think there's probably, what's very funny is I think Spotify would always just say like, this is a distributor problem. Right, that like Spotify would say like, well, it's not up to us. Like the distributors are supposed to moderate this stuff, basically. And I think they've passed the buck a lot to distributors like DistroKid and CD Baby. And even now, I think if you tried it, someone posted a screenshot of trying to upload to DistroKid, and it was like ambient music. And I think DistroKid was basically like, we can't send this to Spotify. And that's also to do with Spotify's decision to like not pay out what they consider like non-music. And so if you have like ambient music that could be classified as noise, a distributor might just reject it. But I think there's probably something distributors can do to prevent this type of thing. On the upload side, right? If there's this amount of volume of music getting uploaded, but then on the stream side, like the stream farming, that's got to all be Spotify.
Yeah, I was going to say, because we're talking now about AI-generated music a little bit, right? And how it plays in tandem. Because like the streaming fraud, distributors don't have anything to do with it really, except if they cooperate on stopping the payout. You know, if there's some handshake or even just an API handshake there, you know, they could cooperate on stopping it from getting paid. But like the accrual of fraudulent streams is entirely on the streaming platforms themselves. But the AI generated music thing, and we can talk about this a little bit because this was another thing we threw in as a related issue, even though like you and I agree that there's no need to conflate AI generated music as an issue with like fraudulent streaming as an issue, really. But they're highly correlated. There is a separate thing about AI generated music that we want to talk about as well today. And that one, I mean, I do think it is entirely the distributor's problem. It's not Spotify's problem at all, even though it's funny, like, not only do we not realize that people think that, you know, streaming somebody directly leads to your money going to them as a misconception, but there's also a misconception that like a Spotify profile is like a YouTube channel and you're logged into it and you just upload stuff to it. Apparently that's what people think, but there's a related issue about AI generated music and the proliferation of it that we want to talk about with reference to like a podcast episode from one of our favorite shows, Search Engine with PJ Vogt, and some other stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you want to just jump into that now? I think I said my piece on the Wired thing, but the Search Engine piece, the episode is called The Russian Cake Switcheroo. And the cake in question that starts the mystery. If you're not familiar with Search Engine, it is a sort of once an episode they try to answer a question. The podcast is acting like a search engine. It's questions you might type into Google or whatever, and they try to answer them. In this case, a listener had found that one of his favorite bands, the rock band Cake, who I knew the one song. I guess that they've got a very famous song that the name escapes me right now. I was not super familiar with, but this listener was thrilled to find they released new music. Got the, a little alert from Spotify of like, hey, new song from Cake. Opened it and saw it was a collaboration between Cake and someone else. It looked to be like a Russian artist. And, upon listening was like, this can't be the band Cake. This is like, it's just, Russian hip hop music. And had nothing to do with kind of indie rock band from Chicago, I think is Cake.
Yeah, it was a rapper, and it was this rapper's name in Russian, and these are like kids today, like teenagers currently. Russian teenage rapper featuring Cake.
Yes. And so, the question was like, how does this happen? Right? Like, did someone like hack Cake's Spotify profile? Did Cake actually collaborate with this Russian teenager to make a song that doesn't sound anything like Cake would ever make? And so, the episode kind of explores that. They actually talked to someone who features quite heavily in Mood Machine, who worked at Spotify, which is a really big get for a pretty solvable problem. They could have just talked to any any musician who's ever had to upload music to the platform to get this answer. But if you are not someone who has ever uploaded music to a streaming service, it's not like a YouTube page. It's not like an Instagram profile. You cannot just add music directly to that. You work with a distributor, and there's very, very, very little artist name validation and correction that happens before your music goes live on Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
And to spoil the episode, that's essentially what happened here. There's a different artist. There's a Russian rapper named Cake. And, when the distributor sent the song to Spotify said, like, yeah, here's the most likely Cake. Here's the biggest artist. And put it on the quite famous band's Spotify profile. And it was later corrected. Which is a very funny problem. Have you seen this happen before to other artists that you follow?
Yeah, I think I put up a reel once on my Rhythm Changes Instagram account where I found a few jazz artists this has happened to. It happened to be AI generated music at the time, though, like coming on the profiles of, I remember Joel Ross being one of them, the jazz vibraphonist, and being a couple other ones. There's a wave of it every once in a while, and then it gets solved. There are some real artists who have their work thrown into like big potpourri profiles. Like I think David Blake, maybe still, but for a while there, around when David Blake was putting out an album with Stellar, I noticed that he didn't really have a profile of his own, and that all his music was getting lumped in with all the other David Blakes of the world, and none of them had staked out individual Spotify profiles. So yeah, I mean, I've observed this a lot, to the point where I predicted the ending of the episode, confirmed via text to you before I had listened to it. So like and you weren't surprised either. Like we both knew about this issue, and that's why it was kind of funny to listen to PJ and his friend talk about it, because they don't really know what's going on, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting to like hear that perception, which it makes sense that people would think that, right? Like a Spotify profile is like a place where you see the artist, there's a little bio, and that bio is put there by the artist or their management or whomever. So it is an interesting thing. I've always found it kind of distressingly simple to do this kind of like, it's a different kind of streaming fraud, right? I think the one I noticed first, and it was probably at the same time as those other jazz artists, Joel Ross and whatnot, the pianist Kiefer from LA, who's kind of like beat music. He's a great jazz pianist. I got the alert on my phone, hey, new music from Kiefer. And Kiefer is an artist who releases enough that would not be unusual. And I went to listen to it. I was like, I don't hear any piano on this. Or if I do, it does not sound like Kiefer's playing. And, he posted on his Instagram, like, a couple hours later saying like, this isn't me. This person is trying to. I mean, they got me, right? I listened to more than 30 seconds of the song, and they got the money for they got a stream out of me. And you do that with a big enough artist or an artist with a loyal enough following, and you can, amass a few thousand streams. It doesn't seem like it would be enough streams to be worth it if you were going for that, but maybe if the artist is big enough, or if you do that for enough artists, you'd be fine.
But like, how does he know that he was trying? Because that would make it different than this Russian Cake switcheroo story, because these guys were not trying. It just ended up coming out like that, right? But somehow you could guess the intent here, or I don't know.
In this case, it was actually an artist who, it was sort of like an aspirational tag. Like it was clear that what this artist was doing was sort of clout chasing. That like Kiefer wasn't featured on the album. This is like a very, very small or unknown artist that just kind of like, similar to like if you're Instagram posting, people will sometimes like, or even tweeting like @mention a celebrity, and it will kind of boost the profile of the post. because some of these algorithms kind of just like will signal boost, Beyonce or whomever. And so in that case, it was like a malicious, chasing streams. This was not a case of someone just submitting the wrong name or getting put on the wrong profile, which does happen all the time. And I'm sure that the benign version of this is much more common than the malicious version.
Yeah, I got a couple questions about this. I guess the first relevant one here is, do we want to live in a world where we police this more tightly and where the default is skepticism about whether or not a new release belongs on an artist profile? And if we do, like, what does that look like, right? Because we know that would be very different than what's happening here because this happens so often, you know?
Yeah, I guess I would say, I'm trying to think of like, what's the harm to artists? Whether or not it's practical, we can get into. But what would be the harm to artists of making a Spotify page or your streaming page like a YouTube profile, something where you control, your artist profile and the music that appears there, including, maybe hiding music like you could on SoundCloud if you're like, you know what, I don't need this one to be on my profile anymore, but I'm going to just kind of like archive it. And if someone has it saved to their playlist, they can have it. I don't want that to show up. What would be the harm in like artists managing that? Because then that could easily show up, right? You'd have verification of the artist when they first sign up, and that artist can just manage their page however.
Well, that would be cutting out the distributors to some extent, right? Which probably isn't going to happen because the majors probably don't want that. And like the big transmissions of music, they don't want that. They would find the way that YouTube works to be annoying to try and put their stuff through.
Yeah. And the distributors still need. And that's kind of, I think, the actual crux, which the episode didn't really point at the distributors enough. That's really the problem with this like streaming, like data cleanliness issue, which I do think is a problem, or it should be seen as a problem for Spotify, right? Because if every time you open the app, there's just like kind of garbage that you're looking at. And for a while, when it was really bad around that time, you posted the reel about Joel Ross, my release radar became unusable because there were so many malicious streams or malicious kind of bad tags and whatever of people like realizing like, oh, I can just say like Drake is on this song. And even if Drake's not on that song, it won't get caught for about a day or so. And so I get, tens of thousands of streams. I'm always using Drake as the example of someone on my release radar that I would be clicking on, but
easy target.
Yeah, exactly. But it really did, for a while. I think they've probably cracked down on it, probably for like big artists on majors. And I wonder if that's, like, I'm sure the majors aren't happy about that if that happens to one of their artists.
Well, yeah, I think if you're like, well, should we cut out the distributors? I mean, I think it'd be lovely for a lot of us if you could cut out the distributors. But like in the meantime, I mean, we also brought up a Fantano video where he talks about this issue to some extent. Not the Russian cake switcheroo, not the identical story, but like other stories of other bands where they've had this experience where they've noticed other stuff getting on their profiles, right? I think this has to be a competitive wedge for how you choose your distributor, because really these days there's even less difference between them. Like, how do you really choose between CD Baby, DistroKid, TuneCore, and all the others? You don't really anymore. Like they've tightened a lot in terms of competing with each other, and the headline offerings by all of them are the same. The pricing is pretty much the same, and it's only in the little details and kind of the minutia that you would find out after using it that could form like your personal preference of which one you feel like using. Like for me, I mean, I personally prefer CD Baby. That's fine. I totally understand why a lot of people personally prefer DistroKid.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier for a lot of different ways. I will say, if you're Canadian and you're a nerd, in my opinion, the easiest way to get paid out in US dollars in the way that you would want to be is through CD Baby. But that's a whole other story. You probably can do it with DistroKid too, but I've just never bothered to figure it out.
I get paid in US dollars on DistroKid, but it is maybe less smooth than I'd like it to be.
That's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But I'm saying like this, in the Fantano video, I think, and when you hear people talk about this, they sometimes complain about like, oh, it took my distributor like 6 weeks to solve this. Mm-hmm. That should be a wedge for which distributor you use. Switching distributors is actually not hard. Yep. It's annoying, like so many administrative things are annoying, but it's not hard. And so if your distributor drops the ball on dealing with this, you should use a different distributor for sure, because of all the different things that could differentiate between them. This is one of their only opportunities to offer a good customer service, because it's entirely in their hands to sort out this issue.
But yeah, 100%. The cases where I've had it, so Tour de France, the dance music project that I have, is a nightmare for distributors because we have an all lowercase. The artist name is stylized all lowercase. Yeah. And it used to be the case that DistroKid would just kind of refuse to send your music to Spotify, and that was
absolutely.
Was that a Spotify style guide thing, or it was? I don't know.
You're right that different streamers have different style guidelines, but no, I mean, it's a precaution by the distributor for sure, because they want it, with all the small fish, they just want them all to play as nice as possible. They want to standardize you as much as possible, so before they send you in. Yes,
yeah, they want it to look nice, and so they would kind of refuse to stylize it that way. So you'd have to like talk to DistroKid support, explain like, no, it really is stylized like that. And then I'd have to talk to Apple Music and Spotify support, because inevitably there would be two profiles created for each, one with the uppercase, one with the lowercase when it got fixed, and get that all tidied up. In all cases, pretty responsive. I think it's a pretty simple issue on the DistroKid side. I think probably for things like the cake problem, they probably have so many of those, and it's probably a little more to untangle, like, okay, if it's not the Russian, or if it's not the, American indie band Cake, which of the other 400 artists named Cake is it?
Or is it the 401st?
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly. Or is this brand new and I'm going to completely split someone's profile, something like that. But yeah, that is actually, a good way for distributors to distinguish themselves, and a good thing to be able to just like switch off if you're having a bad experience and getting screwed by this. There isn't any protection though if you are, say, at our friend Johnny's scale. He's getting to the size where he has enough streams and probably is on the release radar enough that like someone might, maliciously one day be like, I'll just say Johnny's on this track, and get plays just by the clout chasing or by the association, until people realize like that doesn't sound like Johnny. There's nothing really to protect you there as an artist. And again, Spotify's not incentivized to like really fix it until it gets reported by enough people.
Well, and if as AI generated music gets more convincing, it would be harder to identify that it's not him. If you try and make music that sounds like him, or you mentioned like, oh, if like you claim Drake was on the track. Well, what if he was on the track? Sort of like if you cloned his voice, like who ends up being the arbiter? How often does this end up happening? Like this is the danger of AI generated music, separate from the streaming fraud issue that we talked about earlier. But this is a real thing, because if you think about what you have to do to filter that out, maybe I do actually have an idea that's not my own. I've seen it a few times, but one of the ways that you could maybe filter that out is right now by like analyzing the waveform and analyzing the audio. But the more convincing you make that, the harder that is, and there's all kinds of opportunity for false positives for sure. But like, if you analyze the audio, if you make a sonic departure on like your next album, then you have to go and plead your case, or like, what's going on?
I promise this is still me. Yeah. This is it's my electronic project. I got a solution. It's every listener and every artist scans their eye into an orb. And do you know about this already? Do you know about Sam Altman's orb WorldCoin?
No, you have to explain this to me.
So, okay. There is Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, has other stuff that he does. One of his things is, I'm going to do my best to not sound entirely like I'm dunking on this idea, but it's pretty fun. It's pretty dunkable. I'm dunking on it. I think it's dumb. He has, I think, correctly identified that like if OpenAI succeeds in its mission to like make AI kind of just ubiquitous and all over the internet and all of these platforms and all of these places we congregate online, they'll be very, very difficult to tell if you're talking to an AI or you're talking to a human being. One of his I'm gonna I'm gonna make you guess what the technology he wants to leverage to do this.
Okay.
Just if you have any we're talking like a hyped technology that almost certainly won't work to solve the problem he's saying. But if you were,
Well, I was gonna say stable coins, but I don't know if I'm on the right
you,
track.
yeah, it's blockchain. He
Yes, of
wants to
course
do
it
identity
is.
verification on the blockchain. But the way he wants, so it's not just like every human gets, because that's been floated as well. Like, because a blockchain is an unchangeable record, like kind of it's a mathematically unchangeable record of what's happened in history. So you could, in theory, do things like identity verification using the blockchain. The way he wants to do that is to scan your iris using what's called the orb, and your iris, because irises are unique, will generate a cryptographic signature. These devices are an actual orb that have a camera in them, and they do this cryptographic generation and put your put your iris on the blockchain. And that's his solution. That's what he wants everyone to do. And if you scan your eyeball, they'll give you like $40 of like world coin. So of course, there's also like a cryptocurrency behind this identity verification system, of course, which is what gives everyone the ick about this whole idea. Because whether or not you think that's feasible, that people are going to scan their eyes so Sam Altman can have it and make sure you're human, attaching a cryptocurrency to it certainly means there's going to be bad actors and scammers involved.
Great. That was a great explanation. Now I'm not going to go and look into this further.
So yeah, that's one way to make sure everyone who streams on Spotify is a human. We all get the iris scanned.
I got a different idea if you want a different idea.
Let me hear it.
Everything that gets pushed to your profile, you have to approve it in, let's say, just Spotify for artists. I don't know if this is a problem on the other streamers to whatever extent.
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, this could be kind of annoying if you have to go and approve it in a bunch of places, right? That would kind of defeat the purpose of distribution. Maybe you can tie it back to your distributor so that you can centralize the approval process. But basically, like, if you have verified yourself onto your profile, which is what happens, anytime somebody tries to push a song onto that profile, you have to approve it.
Yeah. I think, I'm sure working at a label, it'd be very difficult to get some artists to to do that. I'm sure there are artists who never check their profiles or open them, which again, that's, if it's not important to them to do that, then they shouldn't have to. But I think that's definitely more feasible, and I could see them going that direction. To round out the discussion on the streaming fraud and the weird artist name problem, and people maliciously are doing that in a benign way. Talk about one of your least favorite things, which is a term called enshittification.
Let's go.
That's Spotify. When I talk about all this, when I read about these things and I read the Wired story, and I'm like, how does Spotify stay a usable platform, right? If the average Spotify user just wants to open their phone, find the bands that they like, the actual bands that they like, and listen to music made by those bands and musicians. And that gets harder and harder and harder to do in a world where AI is, there's going to be AI music, there's going to be streaming fraud, there's going to be charts are all broken. How does it not completely crumble?
Okay. Well, I mean, I could provide the black pill here and be like, that's already not what people are going to Spotify to do.
Sure.
What people are going to Spotify to do is to put on playlists and investigate to the minimum which song is being played at which moment and where it came from. So if that's the case, then there's not an issue here if you're looking at it from their side,
I mean, I think that's right. And I think Spotify certainly believes that. I'm inclined to think that people do care what they're listening to on some level. I think if the experience of just hitting play and getting perfect fit content garbage is the average experience in a year or two, because I think right now it's it's out there, but I don't think it's everyone's majority experience. But if it becomes majority experience, the user engagement must go down. I hope it would. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe that's too much faith in people.
Well, the thing is, if we take where you started, and I didn't derail it by
Mhm.
talking about, oh, the state has already deteriorated to this point, which
Right.
we would both agree with. But if we rewound to where you were at, and you're like, okay, what are you going to do instead if it becomes harder to find these things? I think it gets cut off at the social platform level more and more. I think that's happening too already. The consumption happens more through the TikToks
Yeah.
and stays more on the TikToks.
Yeah.
And then the act of going to the Spotify style streamer, it is for when you just want to put on a playlist, and
Right.
you have taken the intention of, oh, I want to listen to the bands I like, and you have kept it on the TikToks.
Yeah.
Or you've kept it on the reels, and that those products, if they continue to grow, they will keep more of that desire on platform. That's what they're trying to do anyway. And so maybe the listening experience just bifurcates more and more to the point where that is what you're going to the streaming platforms for. You are going there when you want to do the lean back listening, and you're not going to try and do too much intentional listening there.
Right. Or if you are being intentional, that you really know what you're after, right? Like, I think certain things like kind of release radar became unusable when people would just, hijack another artist profile to say that there's a new Drake song. But if you are getting your recommendations from TikTok or Instagram Reels or something, that, going to the average indie band, their profile is probably still fine. Although, again, maybe not for long, right? And so, skipping past the major Spotify playlists, which are now becoming really full of perfect fit content, and just going direct to something that a friend told you to check out is, maybe that's the way to go.
I will say too that for like a longer listening session, if you want to put on the music of one artist, like I think we're not in danger of losing that really, because I think the algorithm that decides which songs by that artist are coming up next, I think it should be able to screen for most of the tracks that have the bad mapping and shouldn't be on the profile. I think that's probably one of the easier parts of the problem to solve algorithmically, both because you'd hope that
Yeah.
those ones wouldn't have as many streams, and you'd be able to use other factors. That could get into the problem we were talking about, like analyzing the audio and problems associated with that. It could get into that, but
Yeah.
you'd hope that if you wanted to go and tell Spotify to play the music of the favorite artist, that's not going to be seriously troubled for some time, because there's going to be a lot of real popular songs by that artist that it can serve you up before it has to go down to these problematically mapped
Yeah.
tracks. Hopefully that part of it is not close to being threatened.
This also just made me think about this problem would get worse in a user-based payout platform, right? In a user-based streaming payout instead of pro rata. I guess not, because then the actual artist would get the pay.
Well, I guess it could be worse, because it could be like if you end up listening to the tracks that got mapped onto the wrong artist or something, more of your dollars could end up going to, that
Right.
person. So maybe it's more to sort out there. Yeah, I don't know what in the world where like you can imitate the voice of Drake or the sound of Johnny Tobin to such an extent that's impossible to analyze the audio waveform, which we're definitely headed for at some point. I don't know what that implies for user-centric streaming. The more I talk about it, the more I think that this is an up arrow for Instagram and TikTok over time, and that they're going to be able to continue to ride that format and have like music happen there more and more and more, because people are going to feel like they can trust that. Call it what you want, like the issues with the walled garden style platform, but like seems like it'll be more trustworthy to the fan than to this world where it's a wild west of very targeted AI generated music and stuff.
Yeah.
but then you could generate videos too, and you could be posting that on the social platforms. So
Have you
there's no safe harbor, is there?
have you seen the Google the Veo 3 videos? That's
Yeah, I mean the generation, it's still progressing at the curve that it has been, and like now we're getting to the point where that's delivering some results that look like that. Yeah, absolutely.
that's the first thing in a long time that's given me that like I think it's I don't know if Casey Newton coined this, but the AI vertigo feeling, where you see something that you're just like, oh, weird, a computer can do that. Veo 3 is, if for anyone who doesn't know, is Google's latest kind of video generation model, and pretty convinced, well, very convincing video, and just really like natural looking, not just like Suna or the OpenAI one, and I think the Chinese model. Maybe not the DeepSeek video. There's a different Chinese model who's doing video as well. They were like pretty and looked good, but they did not look like, they didn't have the feeling of real videos, and these ones sure do.
Yeah, I'm not I'm not as worried about it as I probably should be, because again, like nobody's ever looking for just a generic video made to a generic spec.
Yeah.
Or maybe they are if they're just scrolling, but they're also not. Like they want to know who it's from, so to speak. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know how dangerous that is right now. Like I don't know how these levels of video generating capability, I don't know how close we are yet to them being able to infiltrate the relationship you have with particular creators,
Right.
beyond generating a video to prompt. Like I don't know how close it would be to getting between you and a creator who you already follow and fooling you. That's kind of a different level or a different angle to the Turing test of it all, right? I don't know what else has to happen for that to get seriously troubled.
Yeah, I think we're a ways away from that. I more meant that this is just the first time in a while that I'd seen some generation capability that I was like impressed by. Usually,
but the thing is, like, I don't know if we're a ways away from that. My gut would say maybe we are, but I don't actually know what that is. I can't put my finger on what that thing is that would unlock that, or how far away we are from it.
Yeah, big things. Okay, I'm going to transition us into our one more thing with a question, because it's related to my one more thing. What do you use? Because you don't stream much, and you have a bunch of like people send you CDs and Bandcamp links. What do you use to organize your music locally on your machine?
So I have multiple external hard drives, and I have one of my external hard drive that is dedicated to all music files, and it's almost all WAV or FLAC. Sometimes MP3, but I usually try and get the full res versions. And all the music files I get, including rips of all the CDs I get, I put them on a single external hard drive. I have another external hard drive that's just for my podcast episodes, like for all the podcast episodes I've ever produced, because that's a lot of files at this point. It'll continue adding up. But I have one that's just for my music files. And so I plug that into this computer or to whatever when I want to listen to music off of that.
What do you mean? What software do you use to listen to the music that you're listening to? Like, do you use like a VLC, or do you use like one of these?
Yeah, I just use VLC straight off the file explorer. I'm not using a music library app.
You don't use any music library app?
I'm a total caveman about it.
That is really kind of return to nature. You know what? That's really good. Well, all right. Well, my one more thing is somewhat related, because I've been thinking about this more and more, thinking about kind of platform enshittification and degradation. And I have begun a very small home lab project. This is a very nerdy hobby for anyone who's never heard the term home lab, where people often in IT roles, which I'm in, make little servers at home to do stuff for them. In my case, it's a media server. You could, in theory, do a lot of things on it. So for now, it's a movie library, but I think I'll start keeping music on it as well, music that I buy on Bandcamp. And you could have it, right now it's like a streaming service that I can access from inside my house for movies and TV shows. but in theory, could also be a music streaming service. There's also ways of setting up, this is maybe too technical, setting up DNS so I can like access it from outside of my house. So I can talk to my laptop that's plugged into my router at home from another place. It's a fun
That
project.
is effectively literally making your own streaming app if you did that, or at least a 1.0 MVP version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely would be. And there is good software for that. Even for browsing a local library. I think the Apple Music app, which kind of come default on Macs, is not really up to the task anymore of managing a local library, where iTunes used to be great at that. I think there's better alternatives now. And certainly for ones that you can run on a server and then just access it from a web browser.
Yeah. There's a lot there that will be fun to mess with if you have enough know-how to get into it and for it to not seem intimidating, which has not been the case for me so far yet, but I'm aware of things like this. I kind of learned a little bit about it when I first heard about like the municipal library music streaming sort of thing.
I guess these are usually recommendations, and my recommendation then in this case is how I got started with this is a system or a kind of a, I don't know, boilerplate called YAMS, Yet Another Media Server is what it's short for. And even if you are pretty unfamiliar with how to do everything related to this, not super comfortable on the command line, it's a really good set of articles written by this one guy who, I think his story is he had a girlfriend who just like wanted to watch Netflix and didn't want to keep paying for Netflix. And he was like, okay, I'm just going to like teach you how to make your own media server. And this, his girlfriend was not technical. And so he just like set it all up, set up all the downloads and made it very straightforward. So, you're already like most of the way there using Linux as your main operating system. So you could do it.
As long as I could buy a webcam and plug it into my computer, I don't feel intimidated by that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And have it work. Yeah, right away, which it did. So that was good. So your recommendation is that I check this out? Yeah, I can check it out.
Yeah, check it out. I'm not, this is it's a time consuming and nerdy project, but if you have been curious in the past, this is the most accessible. I've tried and failed. This is a shout out to Gavin Grachowski, who did this before me and recommended I try YAMS.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, you're right. The area is not completely new ground to me. Yeah, and I certainly have the goods. Like I've got hundreds of albums that I could kind of feed into this thing.
Yeah, and you've got the hard drives. You could just, get an old laptop, plug the hard drives in, and have them accessible from. I mean, step one is from inside the house, and then the later to having your own streaming service is a later thing that requires a little more setup. But even just to be able to walk around your house and listen to whatever you want is pretty cool.
Well, I do also have an old tower style PC. Like I do have it. It currently has probably Windows 7 installed, but I could easily just boot this Linux Mint onto that, and then I could have, I get a little monitor and tuck that somewhere in the house, and then I could try and set it up there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there's something there.
I've
got a more traditional recommendation for you. It is a podcast episode.
Great.
And it is very, very, very long. But I'm going to even pick a part in it that emphasizes why I'm recommending this to you.
Okay.
So one of my favorite writers on the internet for the past few years has been Alex Danko. Do you know about Alex Danko?
The name rings a bell. Is it a newsletter writer?
Longtime Shopify person.
Okay.
He's American actually, but he has spent a lot of his time in Canada.
Okay.
He appeared on this podcast called Dialectic, which is hosted by this guy, Jackson Dahl, who I was not familiar with. But I noticed that he had Alex Danko on. I think I saw this on X, and I always like to consume his stuff because he's very fun. And he is literate in both tech and music. And he used to be in, I think it was a ska band or something.
Awesome.
In his youth, and he talks about that. And so is a 3-hour podcast episode that I listened to with this guy, and I enjoy most of it, but there's one particular part where he talks about music scenes, and so I'm gonna timestamp that when I share the link to the podcast on YouTube. So definitely check, if you don't check it up to that point, definitely check it out at that point, because you'll understand why he's like kindred spirit right away when you hear him talk about how like Silicon Valley is just like a high functioning music scene.
Whoa. All right. I will check that out. That's very interesting. And I've heard they're a good place to work. I have applied at Shopify a number of times, and we'll see see if that ever comes through for me.
Yeah, I have heard the same, and I also have never been there. But hey, maybe if he knows what's up, and if he knows that you can have that background and be there, maybe I use Shop. I'm a customer of
Oh yeah,
Shopify, not in any serious way, but one of my websites I have built on it, and I still have it up, even though it's like my least active website. So I support them. They're definitely a Canadian success story.
yeah. Although I think they're headquartering in the U.S. pretty soon. I think they've said they hinted.
Well, that's what Canadian success stories do.
Yeah. That's a grim note to end on.
And on that note, we'll see you next week, folks. No, that was great. You haven't gone outside today, so you definitely need to, because it was been like 30 degrees today. So
yeah, I'm going to. I just finished work, so I'm going to get outside and enjoy the sun a little bit. It's still out.
Yeah. All right, we will be back with a new episode next week.